food prices across America are quietly climbing into crisis mode. The overall food CPI jumped 3.1% in the past year. Groceries alone, what you buy to cook at home, rose 2.7%. But here's what the national average hides. When you drill down by state, some households are paying vastly more than others. In one index, Hawaii's grocery cost clocks in at 150 versus the national average of 97. This video will expose the 10 US states hit hardest by food inflation, and why it matters not just locally, but for the entire country. We'll count down the 10 states where food price pain is worst. We'll explore why each one stands out, and what it signals for America's food system. Because your grocery cart may be tied into national trends you've never considered. Let's get into it. Coming in at number 10, Louisiana. Retail Grocery Price Index data show Louisiana among the top states, rising fastest for all grocery items since 1929. So what's driving this? First, the local tax structure. Louisiana imposes a tax on groceries, which raises the baseline cost for food before you even start shopping. Unlike many states that exempt food from sales tax, Louisiana adds this burden directly to every grocery receipt. Second, supply chain issues. Many food items must travel through the Gulf region's distribution network. That network is vulnerable to weather disruptions and logistical delays. Hurricane season brings not just immediate damage, but weeks of supply chain disruptions that ripple through the entire food system. The impact? Louisiana is a lower income state. That means food cost shocks eat a larger share of household budgets. When the average family is already stretching every dollar, even a small price increase can force impossible choices. It affects purchasing power, and it affects nutrition access. Families are choosing between paying rent and buying fresh produce. They're opting for cheaper, less nutritious options, just to keep food on the table. Here's the national connection. Louisiana's regional supply vulnerabilities foreshadow risks elsewhere as inflation persists. What happens when a hurricane hits the Gulf Coast doesn't stay in the Gulf Coast. It affects food distribution across the entire Southeast and beyond. But here's the twist. Even as national inflation slows, states like Louisiana still lag behind the average. The recovery isn't happening evenly, and some regions are being left behind in the economic recovery. Next, we head west to Big Sky Country. Number 9, Montana. According to the Grocery Price Index, Montana reported a 36.7% increase in grocery costs since October 19. That's more than 10 times the recent annual rate. To put that in perspective, if a grocery basket cost $100 in 2019, that same basket now costs nearly $137 in Montana. Why is Montana getting hit so hard? High freight and distribution costs in rural states drive up the retail price of perishable goods. Montana's vast geography means food often travels hundreds of miles from distribution centers to reach local stores. With a smaller population and fewer large retail chains, competition is lower. When there's only one or two grocery stores in town, those stores have more pricing power. Markups are higher. Without competitive pressure, retailers can maintain higher margins on essential goods. Residents report that fresh produce and staple goods cost significantly more than national averages. A gallon of milk that costs $3.50 in a major metro area might run $5 or more in rural Montana. This affects local diets and household budgets. Families are eating less fresh food and relying more on shelf-stable processed items simply because they're more affordable. This pattern underlines a national trend. Rural and less densely populated states are disproportionately affected by food price inflation. The urban-rural divide isn't just about culture or politics. It's increasingly about basic cost of living and access to affordable nutrition. But here's the twist. Even though inflation measured nationally is only around 3%, some remote states feel much more than that. The aggregate numbers mask severe regional disparities that affect millions of Americans. The numbers don't tell the whole story of what families are actually experiencing at the checkout line. Now we're heading south. At number 8, Alabama. Grocery Price Index data show Alabama with one of the highest long-term jumps, 35.9% since 1929. Like Louisiana, Alabama still levies a grocery tax. That raises the baseline cost for food purchases before anything else. In a state where median household income is below the national average, that extra tax percentage adds up to real money over the course of a year. Add tight local agriculture markets to the mix, plus supply chain constraints, especially for perishable goods. Alabama becomes especially vulnerable. The state doesn't have the large-scale agricultural production of neighboring states, meaning more food must be imported from elsewhere, adding transportation costs at every step. Economically, many households in Alabama now spend a rising share of income on food. Food economists suggest that when food costs exceed 15% of household income, families face genuine food insecurity risks. In parts of Alabama, that threshold is being crossed regularly. That reduces flexibility for other essentials. Rent, utilities, healthcare. When your grocery bill goes up $50 a month, that's $50 that can't go toward medicine, car repairs, or keeping the lights on. Nationally, Alabama's burden shows how taxation and local infrastructure combine to create inflation hotspots. It's not just one factor. It's a combination of policy choices, geographic realities, and economic conditions that compound the problem. But here's the twist. Alabama's food inflation may be underreported if housing or energy pressures also overlap. If your rent increased by 10% and your utilities went up 15%, in the same period your groceries got more expensive, the compound effect is devastating. The real cost of living could be even worse than the data suggest. Official inflation statistics don't always capture how multiple cost increases hit the same households simultaneously. Let's move north to New England. Number 7, Vermont. The Datasembly Index ranks Vermont's grocery price increase at 37.4% since October 2019. That's the highest in that entire dataset. What makes Vermont unique? Vermont has a small-scale food economy. The state is known for local farms and artisanal food production, but that doesn't translate to lower grocery costs, often the opposite. Geographic logistics play a role: cold climate, seasonal production. Vermont's harsh winters mean a shorter growing season, and snow and ice create transportation challenges for much of the year. Higher labor costs all raise prices. Vermont's minimum wage and cost of living mean that every worker in the food supply chain, from farmhands to grocery clerks, costs more to employ. The impact: consumers in Vermont face high grocery bills. Even basic staples like bread, eggs, and milk carry premium price tags compared to most of the country. This may influence migration decisions, people leaving for more affordable states. Young families and retirees on fixed incomes are particularly vulnerable to being priced out of the state they call home. It affects cost of living calculations, and it threatens small farm viability. Ironically, the small farms that give Vermont its character are struggling because local consumers can't afford to buy local at current prices, while competing with cheaper imported goods. The national connection, places with unique production and transportation frictions, like Vermont, illustrate why average inflation masks state-level outliers. A 3% national average means nothing to a Vermont family watching their grocery costs climb 7 or 8% annually. But here's the twist. Vermont's strong local food branding, organic, farm-to-table, may mask how much harder standard staples actually cost. You're paying more for the regular stuff, not just the specialty items. A conventional apple or a basic loaf of white bread costs more in Vermont than in most states, regardless of whether it's locally produced or shipped in. Now we're going to America's last frontier. At number 6, Alaska. Cost index data show Alaska among the most expensive states for groceries overall. For general food and grocery items, Alaska consistently ranks near the top. The reason is simple: geographic isolation. High transportation and shipping costs drive up every single grocery item. Almost everything edible in Alaska arrived by plane or ship, and those transportation costs are baked into every price tag. The impact is stark. Alaskan residents often pay 20 to 30% more than the continental US for identical items. A box of cereal that costs $4 in Seattle might run $6 in Anchorage and $8 or more in rural Alaska. That means food value is lower. You get less for your dollar. An Alaskan family effectively has less purchasing power with the same income as a family in the lower 48. The national connection. Alaska's extreme case flags what happens when distribution is constrained. This is potentially applicable to remote or disaster-affected U.S. regions. Think hurricane zones, rural Appalachia, island territories. When Puerto Rico gets hit by a hurricane, or when rural communities lose road access, They experience Alaska-style price shocks. Alaska shows us what happens when the normal supply chain breaks down or becomes prohibitively expensive. But here's the twist. High nominal cost doesn't always translate to a worse inflation rate. Sometimes it's the baseline that's already high. So percentage increases look smaller. If you're already paying $8 for cereal, a 3% increase is 24 cents. If you're paying $4, that same 3% is only 12 cents. The percentage looks the same, but Alaska started from a much more expensive baseline. The challenge is that Alaskans face both high baseline costs and continued inflation on top of those already elevated prices. It's a double burden that statistics don't always capture effectively. Next up, we're heading to paradise, but it comes at a price. Number 5, Hawaii. According to a 2025 index, Hawaii's food and groceries cost index hits 150. That's the highest in the nation by a wide margin. To put that in context, if the national average is 97, Hawaii is 55% more expensive than the typical American experience. What's behind Hawaii's numbers? Island logistics, reliance on imported goods, elevated transportation, and storage costs. Almost everything has to be shipped in, and that adds up fast. Roughly 85 to 90% of Hawaii's food is imported, mostly from the mainland US or international sources. Every banana, every gallon of milk, every bag of flour traveled thousands of miles across the Pacific Ocean. The impact: household budgets are squeezed disproportionately. Cost of living is elevated across the board. Food access is tighter for low-income families. Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander communities, which already face economic disparities, are hit especially hard by food costs that consume an outsized portion of their income. The connection to the mainland. Hawaii serves as an extreme but instructive example of how geography magnifies food inflation. It's relevant for coastal and disaster-at-risk states too. When we think about climate change and rising sea levels, or increased frequency of natural disasters, Hawaii's model shows us what happens to food systems when normal supply chains are inherently fragile. But here's the twist. Hawaii also has higher incomes on average. So the pain is not solely about dollars. It's about relative cost of living. The gap between what you earn and what you spend is what matters. A family making $80,000 in Hawaii might struggle more than a family making $60,000 in Ohio because the cost of basic necessities eats up so much more of that income. Housing costs, energy costs, and food costs all combine to create a cost of living crisis that higher wages alone can't solve. Now we're heading to the Deep South. At number 4, Mississippi. While Mississippi isn't always top in raw percentage increase, it's often cited in most expensive grocery burden lists. Why? Lower per capita incomes combined with high grocery costs. Mississippi has the lowest median household income in the nation, so even moderate grocery prices create an oversized burden. The causes are layered. Lower per capita incomes mean less cushion. When you're living paycheck to paycheck, any price increase is a crisis. Add a food tax on top of that. Mississippi's grocery tax adds insult to injury for families already struggling to afford basic nutrition. Remote supply chains increase costs. Like other rural states, Mississippi faces higher distribution costs that get passed on to consumers. Fewer large discount grocers mean less competition. Without major retailers competing aggressively on price, local stores can maintain higher margins without fear of losing customers who have few alternatives. The impact is severe. A higher food cost share of income increases food insecurity. Mississippi already has one of the highest food insecurity rates in the nation, and rising prices are making that crisis worse. It reduces spending on health, housing, and education. Families are skipping doctor appointments, postponing car repairs, and cutting back on school supplies because the grocery bill keeps climbing. The national connection. This highlights how inflation's impact is not uniform. Poorer states endure the same price rises with far less cushion to absorb them. A 5% increase in grocery costs is inconvenient for an affluent family, but potentially catastrophic for a family living in poverty. But here's the twist. Mississippi's inflation rate might not be the highest percentage-wise, but the burden per household, the actual pain felt, is among the worst in America. This distinction between percentage increases and real human impact is critical. Economic statistics can obscure the lived reality of families making impossible choices every single day. Now we shift west to the desert. Number 3, Arizona. Reports list Arizona among the states with the highest grocery costs. It's part of the top 10 for most expensive Walmart groceries, for instance. What makes Arizona stand out? The arid climate boosts produce costs, irrigation, water scarcity. Growing food in the desert requires massive water inputs, and as Arizona faces historic droughts and declining Colorado River allocations, those water costs are rising dramatically. Plus, many fresh items have to be imported from distant sources. While Arizona produces some crops, particularly lettuce and citrus, much of its diverse food supply comes from California or Mexico, adding transportation and import costs. The impact on residents: higher staple costs, especially for fresh fruits and vegetables. This reduces diet quality. When fresh produce becomes prohibitively expensive, families switch to cheaper processed foods that are calorie-dense but nutrition-poor. It increases trade-offs: healthy food versus affordable food. Parents face the heartbreaking choice between buying fresh vegetables their kids need or buying more filling but less nutritious options that stretch the budget further. The national connection. Arizona's case shows how environmental stress, water, climate, is now feeding into food inflation patterns. This is a national risk as climate pressures mount. As the Southwest dries out and heat waves intensify, Arizona is the canary in the coal mine for climate-driven food inflation that could spread to other regions. But here's the twist. Despite higher costs, Arizona has an expanding population and rising demand. People keep moving to Arizona for jobs, retirement, and lifestyle, even as the cost of living climbs. That intensifies the pressure on food systems even more. More people, same supply constraints. Prices keep climbing. The state's population grew by over 10% between 2010 and 2020, and that growth continues despite rising costs. It's creating a supply-demand imbalance that's pushing prices even higher. Next, we head to the Golden State, California. Food and groceries cost data place California among the most expensive states for household grocery spending. California consistently ranks near the top. What drives California's high costs? High regulatory and labor costs, long supply chains. Even though California produces tons of food, distribution is complex. California's Central Valley is one of the most productive agricultural regions on Earth. Yet, California residents often pay premium prices for food grown in their own state. High real estate costs translate into retail markups. Stores pass those costs on to consumers. In the Bay Area or Los Angeles, commercial real estate is so expensive that grocery stores need higher margins just to cover rent and operating expenses. The impact: even moderate-income households in California feel cost pressure. Small grocers struggle to compete. Independent neighborhood markets are being squeezed out by high rents and the need to compete with large chains that have better economies of scale. Food deserts emerge in high-cost zones. Ironically, some of California's wealthiest areas also have poor grocery access because the cost of operating a store is prohibitively high and land values favor other uses. The national connection. As one of the largest economies, California often previews trends. High food costs here foreshadow stress in other high-cost states. What happens in California doesn't stay in California. It often spreads to other coastal metros and urban centers. But here's the twist. Despite high food costs, California's wage levels offset some of the burden. This highlights how income matters as much as price. A $60 grocery bill hurts differently if you make $20 an hour versus $40. California's minimum wage is among the nation's highest, and many workers earn substantially more than the federal minimum. That means the same grocery basket that's unaffordable in Mississippi might be manageable in California, despite costing more in absolute terms. However, this wage advantage doesn't apply equally. Many Californians, particularly in agricultural and service sectors, still earn low wages while facing high costs. And now, the state hit hardest of all. Number 1, New York. While exact state-by-state rankings vary, data show New York among the highest grocery cost states. Weekly grocery bills average around $266, well above the national average. For a family buying groceries every week, that's over $13,800 a year, just on food at home. What's behind New York's top ranking? High urban density, especially in New York City. High retail rents in prime locations. A small grocery store in Manhattan might pay $20,000 a month or more just in rent, and those costs get passed directly to shoppers. Heavy import dependencies. Much of the food comes from outside the state, plus high labor costs throughout the supply chain. From truck drivers to warehouse workers to store clerks, every person handling food in New York commands higher wages than the national average, and rightfully so, given the cost of living. The impact is widespread. Across the metro area, food cost pressures are driving more households into food assistance programs. SNAP enrollment has increased, and programs like WIC are seeing record demand. Local food banks are stressed beyond capacity. Organizations that once helped hundreds are now serving thousands, and donations aren't keeping pace with demand. The national connection. New York's scenario reveals how urban centers are especially vulnerable. When national food inflation meets local high cost of living, the squeeze is intense. Dense cities with limited space, high rents, and complex distribution networks face unique challenges that rural and suburban areas don't experience. But here's the twist. In New York, food price relief or subsidies may show up faster through city programs, but the burden is still acute and growing. Programs help, but they're not enough to close the gap. New York City has launched initiatives to expand food access and provide subsidies, but these programs reach only a fraction of those in need, and they don't address the root causes of high food costs. From Louisiana to New York, the story is clear. Food inflation in America is deeply uneven, and it's hitting some states far worse than others. So, what does this countdown show? Food price inflation in the US isn't just about a flat national rate of around 3%. It's deeply uneven. States with high transportation costs feel it more. States with lower incomes feel it more. States with tax burdens on groceries feel it more. States with climatic or supply chain stress feel it more. Across all 10 states we profiled, one trend stands out. Costs rising plus less room in the budget equals increased vulnerability. The national average might mask pockets where food inflation is 5, even 10% or more, and it's affecting millions of Americans. The data tells us something important about inequality in America. We often think about inequality in terms of income or wealth, but food inflation reveals a different dimension: geographic inequality in the cost of basic necessities. Two families with identical incomes face vastly different realities depending on where they live. Here's a bold prediction, with food at home prices predicted to rise around 2.4% in 2025, and food away from home around 3.9%, according to the Economic Research Service of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. We're likely to see state-level relief programs emerge. Federal reform of tax and tariff policy around food. States with extreme burdens may initiate targeted benefits or subsidies to offset this inflation. We might see more states eliminating grocery taxes, expanding SNAP benefits, or creating their own food assistance programs. In short, food inflation is one of the next big battlegrounds for both households and policymakers. It's not just an economic issue, it's a quality of life issue. It's about whether families can afford to eat healthy, whether small businesses can survive, whether communities can thrive. The data we've covered today tells a story, but behind every data point is a family trying to make ends meet, a household making tough choices at the checkout, a parent skipping meals so their kids can eat. This is the real cost of uneven food inflation, and it's a cost that statistics alone can't capture. For our next video, we'll dive deeper. We'll examine which food categories, meat, eggs, produce, are driving the worst inflation, and which demographic groups are suffering most, because understanding where the pain is worst is the first step toward solutions. We'll break down the data by food type and show you exactly where your money is going, and why certain items have skyrocketed while others remain relatively stable. If this video opened your eyes to how uneven food inflation really is, smash that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next breakdown. And here's my question for you. Which state on this list surprised you the most? And are you personally feeling the squeeze at your local grocery store? Drop your state and your experience in the comments below. I read every single one, and your real-world experiences help inform future videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.